Hi, everyone. Welcome to M4G Advocacy Media. This is the Journey Series video podcast. I'm Mark, a brown man who's bald with a black and white beard, an orange shirt, and we're in our home office today.
And I'm Crystal. Today I'm wearing a tan shirt with brown and pink flowers. And I'm a white woman with brown glasses and brown eyes, brown hair, and a clip today. And as Mark said, we're in our home office.
And today we're speaking with Brayson Lee, who is an advocate and a champion for people who are recovering from brain injuries, and he's going to talk to us a bit more about his journey. Hi, Brayson.
Hi,
Did I get all that right?
you got it down perfectly.
Okay, great. So, Brayson, maybe first, could you tell us a bit about growing up and how you got your injury and how recovery was?
Oh, okay. Well, the injury occurred in 1981. That's a while back. And I just graduated from high school not too long ago. And as you can imagine, back then, brain injury rehabilitation was at its infancy. So I didn't have much, but I was lucky with what I did have. And there was a rehabilitation center in San Diego that treated brain injury survivors and stroke survivors and spinal cord injuries. And I got my treatment there. I received my treatment there. I had a treatment. I was in the hospital for a month, and I was in rehab several times. There's several episodes, and the first episode was about a year and a half. I had every single kind of therapy you had that you can imagine: speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, driving therapy, vocational therapy, everything under the sun. And it was a really a tough first year because I needed a lot of help from my speech therapist, and eventually, but basically, I needed help for practically 8 years, 7 years, on and off, and I was lucky enough to connect with my speech therapist, whom I credit for giving me the inspiration and the motivation to keep trying, working on it. I many times, but luckily I pulled through, and now I'm where I'm at now. It took me so many years, about roughly 7 years to graduate from a 4-year degree, and then I went on to get two graduate degrees from the University of Southern California, and I went to work from there. Look, there's a lot of challenges, but I was lucky enough to find some employment that kept me working for a number of years.
What kind of work did you do?
Pardon?
What kind of work did you do?
Oh, I started off working. My first job was in Washington, D.C. I lived in California, and my first job was in Washington, D.C., and I examined numbers, and I interpreted writings, and I worked basically. I basically did a lot of number crunching, basically. Subtracting, dividing, making averages of things. And,
Right.
and I think that was good. And I worked best when I was working on myself in projects where I had to focus on something. When I had to talk with folks, or that got a little difficult. And people that at that time, people didn't know. I didn't tell many people about my injury. So they wouldn't understand. But it's kind of hard to say whether or not it was good to not talk about it, or good to talk about it. It's kind of a toss up.
Yeah. And you grew up in a time where disability was not understood, and people had to find ways to get around it or not have to show what they had or stuff like that. And I would say, especially having a brain injury, that it's harder for people to arrive at you being able to be capable enough mentally to arrive at your own conclusions about things. And so I'm sure that's, given the information that people were given about anybody with disability, let alone just the brain injury, that's different. But what would you say your experience as 25 years before my own?
What is the question?
What would you say was the hardest thing, having a brain injury in the workforce? Was for 25 years ago, which was before 25 years before mine. What would you say was the differences then?
Well, back in the 1980s, little was known about brain injury, and even in disability world, it was mostly, when people thought about disability, they thought about people in wheelchairs and things like that. And I wasn't in a wheelchair. There, little was known about neurological disabilities at that time, and learning disabilities was something that they recognized. I was lucky that when I first started, as part of my therapy, my speech therapist had enrolled me into a community college, and that was really good because in the community college, they kind of held my hand in a way and guided me through classes. And I had tutors, and I had professors who really understood. Well, I had one professor. It was an English professor, and I remember this very clearly. He was writing the chalkboard, and I was watching and listening to the lecture, and all of a sudden he popped a question to me, Grayson, what is the, and I answered truthfully. I forgot the question, and everybody started laughing, and that was very traumatic for me. And at the end of the class, the professor said, Bryson, I'd like to speak to you in private. So I walked with him to the bench, outside bench, and he looked at me for a long time, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know. I felt pressured, and I felt kind of guilty. And I told him I had a brain injury, and I went to therapy over there across the street from where the school was. And at that point, he goes, I see. And he became a gentle guy. At that point, he was no longer the intimidating professor. He was very gentle with me. and he was kind. And from that point on, he never asked me questions in class. And he gave me second chances when I did my classwork. And one day in the following semester, I ran into him. And he said, "Brayson, I have to show you something. Come to my office," basically. And we sat down. He pulled out a piece of paper and he asked me to read it. It was a poem. The poem was, well, I forgot the name of the poem, but it was a poem about how many people tried many times, like Babe Ruth struck out 700 times, but he hit so many hundreds of home runs, and R.H. Macy, the person who built those Macy's department store, failed so many times, but then he succeeded. So at the end, it said it said something about don't worry about failure, worry about chances when you don't even try. And it popped in my head that and I looked at the professor and he said, "That's right, you can do it." And from then on, I kept on trying. And from then, several professors in community college had heard about me. And after I might have failed with an F in some test, they kind of gave me a second chance, another try. And sometimes I did okay. I was happy just to get a C or a D, as long as it was an F. But in time, I grew stronger. The interesting thing about school is that in the beginning 2 years or so, it's a lot of memorization, and I had a hard time with that. But in the final years of my college education, it was more of applying what you learned instead of memorizing, and that's when I began to excel. And it required a lot of writing essays, writing papers, and I practiced writing so many times every day that I became okay in it. And that's when I started to excel.
Yeah, you were talking before about disclosing your disability to friends, and you're talking about the workplace. How was there some sort of criteria you used to decide when to disclose to people?
Oh, well, I wasn't that methodical in terms of what kind of criteria they had to meet. Oh, well, when it first happened, when I was 18, all my friends knew about it, so I didn't have to disclose at that point. And you have to keep in mind that I was 18 years old, but I had a mind of a 12-year-old kid. I didn't go around disclosing I had a head injury. I didn't want to be associated with the idea that I had a disability. Because back then, disability was something to be shameful about. I don't know about now. Maybe it's so now too, but back then it was a lot worse. And I didn't disclose my injury to anybody for maybe it was 6 years or so. Eventually, I liked this girl in class. She was a junior. We were in the junior year, the final year before the second year before graduation, and I liked her. She was really smart, and we did a project together, and I felt comfortable with her. So I told her about my injury, and she was surprised by it. And she started asking me a lot of questions. But every time she asked me questions, I would get curious. Keep this private. She goes, "I know, confidentiality." This is the name came, so I tested her. And I kept on telling him more, but I was always second guessing, would she keep things private? Well, eventually, 4 years, 3 or 4 years later, I met another classmate who I became friends with, former classmate, and then she told me about what this girl did, and she went around and told everybody in class about my injury, and that was kind of upsetting because I kind of liked her. So you have to be careful about um, when and how you disclose your injury, because other people, some people are kind and they're thoughtful, but some people will use it to their advantage, or they might spread it as gossip, and it's a tough thing to decide whether to disclose or not disclose. But I didn't disclose for a long time. I didn't disclose much of my injury until after I developed a reputation of doing good work, and that's when I started to disclose some of the information. And even um, I wrote an essay last year. It was last year, 2003. Reflections of a pediatric survivor of traumatic brain injury 42 years later. And this is the first time that I disclosed my past with a broad audience. But I did it in a way that I think would be meaningful to others, and that would help others out. And I think I did it. I think I achieved what I did, what I accomplished too. And so someone described it as this was a love letter to myself that I was writing, younger self. And
You said that in there, yeah.
and I liked it very much. So I started to share more about myself in a way that will help others, in a way that, okay, I'm sure that there are people who might still try to use me in different ways, or use this information for their own purposes. But to balance it out, it's going to be more helpful than anything else.
Right, right. When you're working with a very specific group of people, in our case, broader, disability, not just brain injury, but you're trying to help in a very small group of people, but it can mean the world to certain, situations. And being able to advocate and talk about experiences that you've had to advocate for others, make sure those things don't happen, or, hey, this is good, this worked, and let's keep doing that, or let's just don't keep doing that. And hopefully the right people will be watching to say, hey, yeah, maybe we should think about doing that in a different way, or keep doing that, or whatever that's going to advance society, instead of tearing it down.
Yeah, well, you're right. There's some things that you have that's good to change, and there's some things that good to adapt. So it's a balance of the two. Yeah.
One of those things that we need to change, and certainly would have been a lot more prevalent when you were starting work in the 80s, 90s. But it's still a problem, is people's perceptions. about what disability is and isn't. So do you want to tell us a bit about the most recent essay, The Difficulties Are Not Deficits?
Oh, yes, this is my second essay that was published. The article's in press right now, and it's going to be coming out in a journal of Adolescent Health sometime this year, I hope. But you can get the article in their website. It's called Difficulties Are Not Deficits, and that essay came. I don't sit around and write essays all day long. Oh, the other sidetrack. Sometimes when you read the essay, it looks really nice, a little coherent, and flows really well. But behind this essay, one-page essay, was months of work, and sometimes, for example, the first essay, Reflections, took me 2 years or a year or two to think about the idea. But once I got the idea down, it took me a few months to write it, and took me a few months for people to accept the article for publication. The second essay, Difficulties Are Not Deficits, came about from I was listening to other survivors talk, and their advocates, and they always talk about deficits. What are your deficits? Or I had survivors talk about these are my deficits, and I was thinking to myself, it burns me when I hear those words, because I know they weren't true, and I thought about how my own therapist never told me that I had a deficit. They told me I had a problem, I had difficulties, and they were understanding. They helped me through a lot of things. But so I was in college, and I was around a lot of people with disabilities, special education in college, and as a young person, I remembered how some of the kids they gave up real quickly, and I started learning, because that is what they call learned helplessness, where people they learn to be helpless all the time, basically. I don't know if that's a correct definition, but it makes sense right now. But anyway, the essay, the deficit was hard for me to grasp, because I started learning that the word deficit implies that you were born with a deficit. But I didn't have a deficit. There are some people who, what did I say there? There's a connotation behind the word deficit, meaning something about you can't be educated, you can't learn, or there's a problem with you internally. And this was all untrue. So I started writing an argument for why difficulties are not deficits, and it's just a change of attitude. It's basically what I argued in this essay, that people need to change the way they look at difficulties, in the way that so that they bring hope. When you have a deficit, you can't repair it. There's something wrong with you, or something. It's an inborn flaw, an imperfection. Is what I said, and so it's an argument where I had to say why you shouldn't use that word, because it basically limits you when you adopt that same language.
Yeah, anything else?
Yeah, definitely there's definite connotations, and we talk a lot about, how people were not given the framework to deal with disability, you know. Uh, Well, in that same way, they haven't been given the terms and use words like deficits and not seeing the abilities within those, and seeing it in a bad light, and not being able to come to a place where you understand that they might have abilities, more abilities than we have, um, and being able to not use the word deficit and use abilities, focus on that instead of the deficits. I mean, don't ignore that there's deficits, you know, be able to be okay with that, be confident in those are things about me, whether you like it or not, that's you, but I'm good with it. But also I'm confident in my abilities more so. So, that's where we as a society have failed people with disabilities.
Yeah. Well, from from a young person's perspective, when I was really young, so everything that adults tell me, I believed, and especially if they were professional, I thought they were experts in everything. And words matter, even if you like the word or don't like the word, words matter, and I think it's good because it's good to be careful of how you use words with young persons because you can influence their thinking.
We're at a place where we're the older people with disabilities now. And the our generation just wasn't given the framework to be able to deal with us. And we don't want to say to younger generation that those are the same words that we need to use. And we want to make sure there's less psychological safety in every environment for you to accomplish what you want to accomplish and encourage you regardless of your disability.
Well, one of the things that I'm hoping to do is basically shine a light on a road for younger generations, people who are going to be to kind of not show them the way, but to show them that there's a future ahead of them, and the future can be bright depending upon what you do, and how you tackle the difficulties or the barriers that you face now. So my job is basically to shed light for people to see so they can walk down the road themselves.
Right. I think it's so interesting where you are, being 25 years out from my own disability and struggles. Well, I mean, not that I'm not still, but it's so interesting though, where you're at a place where you have experienced so many things and so many different decades of watching how people deal with disability. What would you say are the biggest changes that you've been proud of?
What kind of change? Changes
As
in,
far as like society and how they view disability and the things they put in place to help disability thrive.
okay. Well, I think that um, uh, the society overall is more accepting of brain injury than it was 4 decades ago. But there are still pockets of
Yeah.
groups of people who still think certain ways, and I don't know how to tackle that one, because that was really about how people look at the world and stuff like that. For example, if you look at any social ills like racism or sexism, no matter what kind of laws you instill or you establish, or whatever principles you write, those sexism still exists among some groups, and racism still exists among some groups. It's just that you have to just work around it.
And ableism. Yeah.
Yeah, and ableism. Uh, I think it's kind of un, unrealistic to believe that you will eradicate everything. But what the goal is more of how to be able to manage it, how be able to cope with those situations when it comes up.
Mhm.
Yeah, there are just some groups who usually it's for reasons that they want to hold on to control or power or some sort of upper hand they have. They're just unwilling to budge because it wouldn't benefit them in any way.
Well, that could be part of the reason, but there's so many other possibilities of why those stuff occurs, that it becomes almost a metaphysical discussion of all the possibilities. So I kind of stay away from that, because you can get really far out there. But I think that you just have to understand that these will exist. You just have to work around it. I worked around, okay, for example, in in a workplace, probably um, 3 decades in, about in my final five years of my work, of official work, I started to tell a little bit more people about my injury, and it was it was good with some situations, and it wasn't good for others. I think some people mentioned something about how they wouldn't have hired me if they knew. And that kind of was telling to me, disclosure is good, but you have to be able to be careful who you disclose it to.
Right. Yeah, we talk a lot about, sometimes uh and the reason people don't disclose or do, but maybe mask some things, or invisible disability parts, is because it takes away from like the given opportunities, or the fair pay, or positions you want to get to, you know. Um, so, you have to be careful of who you share with and how it's going to help you in life. whether you're trying to raise a family, buy a home, whatever, is going to help you be able to get by in the world, financially. So like I said earlier, if there's not that psychological safety of no matter what I share with you, I'm still gonna get the same opportunities and not be judged, you know.
Well, I think one of the things that I think is really important for brain injury survivors or any persons with disabilities is that when you finish school and you go in the workforce, you there's other barriers. You're competing for the position that you're asking to work in, and for me, looking back at it, I think my volunteer work that I've done and the internships that I've had really made. Without those internships, without volunteer work, I wouldn't have any history for someone to say, well, we're going to hire you versus someone else who might be more eloquent in their speech, in their presentation. And so for me, I was able to get jobs in DC as an analyst and as a lobbyist through the work that I've done, through my internship stuff that I've had and the accomplishments that I've did. So when survivors reach an age where they begin to think about getting ready to go to work or getting ready to finish school or their training, take advantage as much as you can of internships and volunteer work, because that's where you get experience to demonstrate to people that you can do what you want to do. So your experience will speak for you. It spoke for me.
Yeah, definitely. I've had gone to college and stuff like that, but I will never use that again. Of course, I've had the experiences and I have those contacts and stuff like that, and the stuff that I'm, of course, will take with me. But as far as it being able to take what I've learned and say that you have to hire me based on my credentials. If you can't talk with me and get what you need from my lived experiences and the work I do now, then I don't want to be part of it. So I agree.
Yeah, well, just watching your videos, I can see there's a lot of preparation work behind the scenes to get to where you're at. So I know that you're a good organizer. And when I talk about college, that's me. There are many forms of colleges, trade school, technical schools, but so there's all forms of education that will help you move you along in life. And but I think internships and volunteer work is something that's very valuable because they demonstrate your commitment to and your reliability of showing up at work every day and getting whatever you're assigned to do, getting those accomplished. That speaks a lot about you in ways that you can never say.
Definitely. The experiences I've had and the volunteer stuff I've done and all the things I've done that don't include anything for college or web design or anything else I've done, is nothing compared to being able to help people and connect with people on a more personable level and helping them, realize and encourage them to be what they maybe what they've been told they can't be.
Yeah, well, I think the future, no one can ever tell you what's going to happen in the future. So just I think as long as you keep moving in the direction that you want to go, and being able to uh, uh, face challenges and barriers, and when you're confronted with something that that might block you, you might get stunned at first. You might kind of sit back. You might wonder, but as long as you try to regroup and figure out another way of doing it, I think I focused a lot on what I could do individually by myself, so that I end up building a reputation of doing good work.
I had a question that I wanted to ask. When you were going through rehabilitation, and the speech therapy and all the different therapies, how or what was like, how did you come to the decision, or how did your therapist help you come to the decision that it was time to progress beyond that and stop doing the actual therapy? I mean, something that we've talked about, there's there's some people that think that you have to keep doing rehabilitation forever because you're permanently broken, right? And I wonder what your experience was with that and how you made the transition.
Okay. As an 18-year-old kid, I didn't purposely say, I'm gonna sit down and I'll make this transition on this date. I just went along with whatever they were saying, what people were saying. And um, in terms of, see, you pose a lot of questions, and the part about when to end therapy. My therapy lasted for a year and a half, basically, the first session, and that's a lot longer than what they're allowed to in most cases. From what I hear, some people, I've heard that insurance companies limit the amount of time to like a few months or something like that, and that's one of the things that kind of doesn't upset me. It just makes me wonder, because in the first 3 months I was unprepared for anything. I was not prepared for anything, but so I was lucky that I had insurance that let me continue my therapy for a year and a half. And then after I left the therapy, I found therapy in other ways. I went to there was I was near a university called University of California, San Diego, and there was a professor there, a neurologist, who was participating, who was doing a study, and I found a way to participate in the therapy, in the session, in the study, and I got free therapy for that. And when I was in school, there were some clinics where other students practice their work, practice their speech pathology, and I got free speech therapy by participating in those clinics. So there are ways sometimes to get therapy that would help out in the long run, and then and eventually some I was in a dark moment in my life about 3 years out of my therapy, out of my trauma, where I ended up contacting my social worker, and she brought me back in for some more counseling. But I was lucky that I had a caring social worker and in a facility that allowed that to happen.
Yeah, there are definitely people in our lives that are encouraging and to help us be able to be the best we can be, to extend a hand to others.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this. I never mentioned it, but I wrote a memoir about my first 15 years of life after injury, and I started writing this memoir back in 1992, about 12 years after my injury, and it took me 2 years to write the memoir, and about 20 years, 30 years of on off editing the work. And now it's being considered by some major publishers. I
Wow.
have a literary agent who caught attention to the story and really liked it. So she's helping me. Not she, two agents who work together. They're both females. They're helping. So hopefully, the book publishing, traditional book publishing takes a long time. So hopefully I will have good news to share in a year and a half.
Keep us updated on that. We'd love to know about it and be able to share it on our website when you have it done.
Yeah, it's tentatively titled Without a Helmet.
Without what?
Without a Helmet.
Okay.
So because I was riding on my ATV and I wasn't wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the book that you're working on. Any more essays that you're working on?
Essays are interesting because I don't sit down today. I don't typically sit down and say, I'm going to write an essay today. The topic hit me. I might be walking down the streets or thinking about something, and I need to have something hit me and be striking. Yeah, I have to be kind of motivated, inspired to say something for me to write an essay. So luckily, I've written one essay for each year. But if you have, based on the two essays that I've written, I'm sure that there are questions people would have if people such as yourself would come up to me and say, Brayson, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And one of those this or that might strike me and it might motivate me to explain what I'm thinking in an essay. That would be good.
And so if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do?
let me write down my email address. Let me write it out first.
And we can share that, we can provide the link to that or your LinkedIn page on our.
Oh,
But-
yeah.
For our visually impaired people, can you verbally tell people, and then we'll also put it in our show notes?
Okay. Anybody can connect with me through LinkedIn, and my email address is my first name, Grayson.lee.msw.msg@gmail.com.
Okay,
Thank you so
well,
much for your time today.
thanks, Grayson, for
Yeah.
joining us today.
Yeah. For inviting me.
Yeah,
And
you have a good afternoon.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys. And don't forget to encourage, educate, and empower someone today.
Bye.